Okay, so I'm starting recording now. So we will post part um, of tonight's meetup on our YouTube channels. If you didn't know that we have a YouTube channels, we do have one, so make sure that you check that out. And so with that, I want to introduce our two speakers tonight. Gretchen and David. So on the screen, you can see their names and their LinkedIn profile. If you would like to connect with them afterward, that's where you can find them. And so with that, I want to turn the mic over to Gretchen for her to introduce herself. So Gretchen, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get started in UX? How long you've been working in your current place, and then maybe provide some examples of product you have launched in your current place?
Yeah, thanks. It's really nice to be here and to see everybody here. So yeah, my name is Gretchen Nash. I'm currently a creative director at Amazon. I work in the Amazon devices org, and so I work on the Echo Show products. So I am currently a creative director there. I have, when I first started at Amazon about 4 years ago, I was a sole contributor, so I was a team of one. I didn't have any direct reports. And prior to working at Amazon, I studied graphic design in undergrad. Interaction design wasn't really anything that was offered at the time. And so I actually worked in motion graphics after school, and then transitioned into software and UX design. So I kind of, I started with a traditional print background. I have a little bit of motion graphs background, and then I started working in UX about 6 years ago, maybe a little more than that now. But it's been, kind of dipping into different fields has been awesome. So happy to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Gretchen, for the intro. David, it's your turn. You have the
floor. Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much to everyone for having me. It's a great privilege to be a part of all this. So like they mentioned, my name is David O'Hara, and I'm a product design manager at Axon. So I got started similar to Gretchen. I started as a graphic designer. So I did graphic design and commercial art as a double major in college. And then after that, I got hired into a small creative agency and learned a lot of bumps along the way through that process, including for those of you that might be, old school in your methods, flattening a PSD when you're building a website. Usually you try to keep it in layers. And I'll never forget one of my biggest gaffes along the way was, accidentally flattening that, having to go to my boss and be like, so I just accidentally flattened the PSD. I didn't save a backup. And he's like, well, this is one of those opportunities where you get to learn lessons the hard way and you get to go redo that work. So I did it better the second time around, which was good. But anyway, so I spent about 6 years in creative agencies, learned a lot through that process. And one day, my boss came to me. This was at my second agency I was at, and he's like, hey, do you do UX design? And I was like, sure. And he's like, good, because we have a client coming in on Tuesday that needs UX design. And I'm like, great. So he walks away and I like swivel around to my desk and I'm like, what is UX design? Because at that time, like I really wasn't familiar with it. And so after I read up about it a bunch, I was like, oh, like this is a lot of the process that I already do. It's just a little bit more formalized. So I started learning a lot about it. And through that process, ended up doing 3 or 4 different projects with that agency in UX, really loved it. And then I went on to work with the Office Labs team at Microsoft on a contract. And so that was like my first step into the UX space. And I was visual and UI designer on that team. Loved it, wanted to go further into it. And I got the opportunity at a company called Moz to go and lead UX on a couple of their projects. So I went and started working on, there were a couple early acquisition products. And so I was at Moz for about 3 years. And then after leaving Moz, I came to Axon. I've been at Axon about 4.5 years.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. I love that story about flattening a PSD. Like for those of us who's been designing for a while, who didn't born into the Figma era where you can do version histories, like I'm sure like all of us have experienced that, and like it get burned into your brain to remember to use Command
Save
S
your files.
afterward.
Totally.
To make sure that you save the file. Great. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen so you can see us better with the camera. So now, just to give you everyone an overview of what the agenda looks like. So now I'm going to go through. So this is the panel discussions time. We have a few questions that we have pre-planned for David and Gretchen. And so, and after we've gone through that, we'll have this for about 30 minutes-ish. And so we will open up the floor for some Q&As at around 6:45. And so if you have any questions, let's try to hold it until the end. And after that, we will move into a breakout room. So David and Gretchen will each be leading a breakout room with the two different topics that we have posted on our meetup page. And so at that point, you can, as attendees, you can choose which room to join and enter. So if you have, I think you do need to have a more recent versions of Zoom to be able to do that. So if you have any problem at that point, feel free to let us know, raise your hand. So with that, I'm going to start with the questions. Okay, so here we go. So the first one is, when did you transition into leadership management, and what was it like? I think like both Gretchen and David, you did touch on it a little bit. But David, since I see your camera on, why don't you start telling
Sure.
us?
So like I said a minute ago, like I've been at Axon for about 4.5 years. During that time, I came into the company as a contractor for a very specific project, and was able to see that project go well. And thankfully the company was like, hey, we'd love to bring you on full time. And so I was able to move into a new project where they were launching a new product called Records Management. And that project is really just centered around the capturing of a record of what happens at an incident. So if you're not familiar with Axon, it's a public safety company. Our mission is to protect life, and we work a lot with law enforcement, first responders, etc. And so the records product is helping them document everything that occurs in those situations. So I spent 2 years working on that product and helping launch it. After that, I got an opportunity to work on a product called Interview Room, and it's essentially where the officers are interviewing citizens, whether they might be a suspect in a crime or they could be a victim of a crime, and helping document their story of what happened. And so it's a pretty important, product. And so I was able to work on that. And then there was a mobile side of it, so a hardware component that I was able to work on that was really interesting to get to work on the hardware side as well as the software, and develop this kit that could be deployed in the field in situations where maybe the victim might be a child and it's very uncomfortable to bring them into a very cold police station. So bringing them into a more warm environment for them to be able to be comfortable telling their story. So I got to work on that. And one thing that we do at Axon is we transition people into leadership. So we have a role that we call design lead. And so at that time, my boss was like, hey, you've been doing really great work. And I had expressed interest in moving into people management. And so I was promoted to design lead. And that role, essentially, you take on both sides. You start managing a little bit and mentoring, and you're also doing IC work. And I really loved it. And so after that going well, they transitioned me into the design manager role. And so I've been a design manager at Axon for 2 years now, and loving it. So that's pretty much that. Now I'm overseeing our evidence management product, which I'll talk a little bit more about later.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Gretchen, why don't you share with us and tell us a little bit about when you transitioned into leadership management and what it was like?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned a little bit earlier that when I started my career, I was in motion graphics. And so I think that leadership can definitely feel a little different depending on the size of the company. And so when I was an art director at some of the motion graphic studios that I worked with. So I was designing storyboards, and then I was working with the animators to kind of bring that to life, and cross collaboratively working with the agencies to kind of drive adoption for those ideas. And then I worked at a company called Tectonic for a while when I transitioned into UX design, and I was an art director there, and then eventually grew into a creative director role. And there, you're kind of mentoring, similar to what David mentioned. It's like you're a design lead, so you're mentoring other designers, and then you're also working on strategy and vision. And then when I transitioned to Amazon, I left the creative director role to actually do an independent contributor role, meaning I had no direct reports. So it was actually like a shift for me, because I went back to being an independent contributor. And I think what transitioned me into leadership at Amazon was that I was successful in driving some high visibility features with a lot of ambiguity. And I think being able to kind of handle that level of ambiguity and work cross collaboratively between product and engineering really helped me kind of grow confidence into leading without having direct reports. So like you could still inspire the vision for products without actually having anybody report to you. And then during COVID, actually, my team has grown from a team of 2 to about 14. And so during that time, we've all been virtual. I haven't met about 10 people on my team. I've never met them in real life. So it's been a lot of growing the team virtually and driving multiple projects at once. So it was a slow build for me at Amazon for sure. I've been there for about 4 years, but I think having driving a higher visibility project that was successful really earned a lot of trust. And then essentially I had a really good sponsor that believed in me and helped me build a team. So it's been really fun. And I also really love the mentorship and coaching part of being a lead.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story there. And like one thing I do like notice, and then like you, Gretchen, and then also some other people within my network, is that a lot of people tends to be in a management position in like mid to smaller size company, and then they move to bigger org, and then they might start as an IC again, and then eventually they become a manager again. So it's interesting to hear your side of the story. So with that, what was something that you wish you knew earlier in your career? Gretchen, let's start with you, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about like that transition from management, like IC to management, and then back to IC, and then to management again. Like what would you do differently, or tips?
Yeah, I think when you're kind of in school and you're developing your craft, I think it's really important to become an expert in your craft, but also I didn't realize how important communication skills would be. And so I think that is actually probably one of being an expert in your craft and knowing how to navigate and direct through difficult situations, but then also being able to communicate and work with a lot of different types of people. So I think you have to be very interested in collaboration and just leaning into good email correspondence, actually over indexing on over communication sometimes, especially when you're virtual, is something that I didn't really realize was an important hard skill to have as you're transitioning into leadership, but it's one of the most crucial parts of your job.
Yeah, definitely I agree. And like, especially for design, like for all of us in the design field, I feel like communication is definitely very important, especially at some point you're going to be presenting your work, and then you need to be able to take feedback and like collaborate with others. And especially for management, for someone in management role, definitely communication is a really important skill. So David, how about you? Do you have anything that you wish you knew earlier in your career, like any tips for someone who's starting out in management or leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually wrote down like several things because I think this is a really great question, and there's no like formula or like cut and dry approach, right? I think each of us are individuals, and as we become a leader, it's really about figuring out what is, your style, and being authentic to yourself as a person. And one of the things that I had written down was about like being an authentic manager and being authentically you in that. So I think early on, it's natural to try to like be a certain thing that maybe has been demonstrated to you by a manager or that sort of thing. And obviously, there's very specific things that's like, man, I want to be like that as a manager. I want to be like that. But it's really figuring out who you are, I think, as a manager. Um, so one of my favorite quotes in this area is by Simon Sinek. It's leadership is not about being in charge; it's about taking care of those in your charge. And I think that is sort of that like servant leadership mindset where it's like, okay, I'm not here telling you all what to do, but I'm really here to help you be successful in your role. And I think that's an important thing to have right as you're getting started as a leader. Another, thing I would say is just listen more than you talk. I think sometimes we get this idea that, oh, we're a leader, like we need to be the one giving out all the answers and direction, etc. But it's like, no, like actually it's better if you're just quiet and listen and take in, and then have like when you do speak, make sure it's like something that's really helpful. Or I mean, obviously sometimes there will be times when maybe what you say isn't helpful, and being able to admit that as well. That was something else I had written down, is um, being able to admit when you're wrong or when you don't have the answers, and it's okay to be that way. And it's by doing that you're creating a safe space with your team where it's okay for them to be wrong, it's okay for them to fail, and by you demonstrating that yourself, it kind of creates that space there. I have a bunch of other things, but I don't want to talk for too long, so I'll Gretchen, is there anything you would want to add?
No, but I think that those are all great points. I think especially the two things that stood out to me that I like could not agree with more are finding your own leadership style that works for you. Like you don't need to change or like fit into a mold of someone else. And then also active listening. So actually it's like allowing your team to kind of like grow and empowering them. And then, you'll know you can kind of lead from the back a little bit more, but you don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. And in fact, that might hurt you longer term to be able to scale.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I have a couple of things that I think would be,
Yeah,
really,
go for it.
really great. So one thing that early on I realized was like just establishing trust early on with your reports, um, making it to where they can express when something isn't going well, or if something, you know, on their project just went wrong, because I think I've been with managers before where it just doesn't feel natural to be able to express those things, and it's going to be negative or reflect negatively on you. And so just creating this trust where it's like, hey, I want to know when things are going wrong so that I can help you potentially make things go right, and support you in that. So I think that's a really important piece. um, Also trusting your team to do the work. I think early on it's easy, especially when you're transitioning from being an IC. You're used to doing the work and coming up with solutions on your own, but creating space for them, you give direction, creating space for them to do the work. It might not be exactly how you would do it yourself, but evaluate it according to what the project needs are, and not according to what your solution would be. I think that's a really important piece that I've realized over time, and just trusting them to do the work. Like you hired them, or maybe you grew to start managing them, and they're skilled at what they do. So trust them in that.
Yeah, I love that. And I see Gretchen nodding your head. And I think Gretchen, at one point we had a discussion, and then I think we did kind of touch on that, like being able to trust the people who do the work, because like as an IC, you're supposed to be doing the work and making sure everything's pixel perfect. But then when you become a manager, then you need to create a space, an environment where people can feel comfortable doing their work. And then, yeah, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's if you think, and I think actually like being an IC for a while and really like being in the week, like really understanding, like think about how you learned and how many times you failed as an IC. And that is good because that's how you learn. You pick up, get back on your feet, and look forward. And so I think from a manager or leadership perspective, you should actively like talk about how that should be part of the processes. It's expected to take risks and fail, and you know, create a culture where people feel comfortable doing that, and that, you know, you'll have their back, you know, if anything happens. Because I think you can like kind of learn what is, you know, a low risk or high risk situation, and what's reversible and what isn't. And so your instincts, because you want to spend your time in the places that are, you know, higher strategy, more vision work, you know, really building the steps to get there, instead of, you know, in you know, the lower risk things that maybe have a little bit more flexibility, and that really your team should be having the autonomy to make those decisions.
Right. And I love what your point about like the lower risk part, because like, yes, like we want the designers to be able to learn and fail, but then maybe not a failure that would like break their company or break their product. So within that like safe boundary of that sandbox where they can experience and learn on their own.
Yeah.
Cool. And so my next question is, what are some pros and cons of being an IC versus a manager? And just to clarify, for those of you who might not be familiar with the IC term, is individual contributors. That means being a designer or that you don't manage anyone. And so I know like there's like some companies, agency have like this 10x engineer or 10x like designers. Like you do have an option of like a career path without becoming a manager. And so maybe like to some people, like maybe be moving on as up to a management role is right for some people, but maybe not for all. So love to hear your thoughts, Gretchen, on like, what do you think of the pros and cons of being IC versus manager?
Yeah, I loved being IC. I had so much fun. Like the thing that was most gratifying for me was like being able to, you know, concept something and drive it to the end, and like hand it off to engineers or to the animators, and like see it come to life and point on something at screen and be like, hey mom, look what, you know, like look what I did. And the con, and you know, so you can experiment with a lot of different things and different projects. The con to that is that you may not have control of the work that comes to you. So you don't really have control over what projects come to you. That's usually left to your manager, leadership, or what have you. And then for management, a pro to management or leadership is that you have kind of that higher level of visibility into different projects. So you kind of have a better holistic vision of what's going on in other parts of the company or other parts of teams, so that you can kind of yeah, like you just have a little bit more control in that way. And then, you know, a con of it is that you are overseeing, or and specifically for management, you're overseeing a lot of you might be overseeing multiple people, so you have to help them prioritize, and you don't really know what's going to come your way each day, so you have to expect some sort of flexibility. So you have to be a little bit more flexible on your feet to kind of, you know, respond to things. And so that was a transition point for me. And then also transitioning into leadership or management, you may not be getting personally recognized for things anymore. It's much more, if you know, at least my philosophy as management is like I'm a little bit more backstage. and kind of helping make sure that what's, in focus is production ready and like ready for the spotlight. So if you're really like personal recognition, you may not be getting that as much from management because you'll be leading through others, but in your heart you'll know like how much, like what you did to help that person grow, and that's what's super gratifying.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for that. And Gretchen, I believe that right now you're not doing any IC work at all. You're plainly focused on management, right?
I am successfully like I'm delegating. It was definitely a transition though, like when I have more direct reports now, so I think it depends on the size of your team. There's also a principal path where like you can have 1 to 2 direct reports and still be making if you love making. So but for me, I think I'm at the point that like it's actually like I shouldn't, because that will I can't drive something to the end. So but it takes time. It took me about a year into leadership in order to actually effectively make that transition, I would say.
Gotcha. And David, I think you're on the other side of the spectrum where you're still doing some IC work, and then you're also managing at the same time. Can you share with us like what do you think are some of the pros and cons of being an IC versus manager, or yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely relate to a lot of what Gretchen was saying. It definitely becomes more challenging the more you are managing to go super deep into an IC problem. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges I face right now is you end up doing a ton of context switching. You're in and out of meetings. And so you have to be really intentional about how you carve out time for yourself to have that maker time. But even with being intentional about that time, it's difficult to go super deep and just laser focus on a problem when you're off checking on other things and you're looking with that high level view like Gretchen was talking about. And then going super deep, it just becomes pretty challenging to keep that going. So for myself, I have a few strategies to make that work well. But if I'm completely honest about it, I think I'm less effective as an IC as I was in the past. And I think that will continue to become less effective. And I've already been having conversations with leadership about, hey, this isn't sustainable. And eventually I'm gonna have to let this go. And talking about letting go, some of that is, as you're managing, you are controlling, all of the work. And I think for some people, it might feel natural to be like, ooh, I'm going to keep the cool stuff for me. Like, I'm going to work on this cool stuff over here and you guys go work on this. But if you're really managing the way that you should be, it's really looking at, I want to highlight those working with me here. And I want to give them the cool things because they have the actual time to do it really well. And so it's sort of this transition where it's like, whereas before you might have been like, ooh, I want to work on that really cool thing. Now it's like, ooh, I really want to give this to this person because I know they're going to really excel at it. And so I found myself taking on more of the random little things here and there, or things that might not be resourced, but we still need to do. I might take that on so it doesn't overload another designer. So those are, some of the challenges that you look at. But the pro side, I think, is exactly what Gretchen was saying. I mean, you have this high level view of everything and more of like the strategy side of it and thinking more long term. And so it's a little bit of a shift in your thinking, but it's really fun to work in that capacity. So while it's like you're letting go of something, you are gaining a really rewarding side of things as well. And I'll talk a little bit later about kind of this concept of letting go of your Legos. It's a article out there that I'll link to, but it's really helpful in thinking about how to do this.
Nice, great. And so let's move on to the next question. So David, what are some characteristics and skills that will help someone become a good leader? And so I think you have like mentioned something, and we talked about communication skills, but if you are to name a few characteristics or skills that makes a good leader, what would you say those are?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's it's not an exhaustive list, right? Like I think there's so many different characteristics, and it's going back to figuring out who you are as a leader, and what those characteristics should be. But just for myself, I think empathy is a really big one, to be able to understand where your team is at, a specific designer's situation, their strengths, their weaknesses, etc., and be able to help coach them in that, and work in that space. So empathy, humility, being able to check your ego at the door, like I was talking about earlier, being able to demonstrate and be vulnerable about when you're wrong or when you don't know the answer. I think that's a fairly important. I think I mentioned earlier being a good listener is another one. Confidence, it can be a challenging thing to be confident initially as a leader, and so I think our next question that we're going to talk about is a little bit more, so I'll just pause, put a pin in that for a minute. But then optimism is another one for me, where I try to lead with optimism. I tend to be an optimistic person generally, and so it's a little bit of that cheerleader rah-rah mindset sometimes, but it's really helping the team see the positive path forward, when things might not be going right and there might be high frustration, or concern, helping kind of lead them through that difficulty, and just that like coach or mentor mentality. I think those are the things that are top of mind for me as far as characteristics for a leader.
Yeah, I think like optimism is like one thing that really stood out to me, because I feel like when I work with someone, a manager who is really positive, it really makes a big difference. Because like, I mean, work is hard and you're going to run into challenges, and some days not going to be the best. And like when you work with a really optimistic person, or even like team members, or if you work with pessimistic personalities, it makes a huge difference. So Gretchen, do you have anything to add to that? I feel like we did name a lot of different characteristics, but something that you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think David hit a lot of them. I think the other thing I would add is, I think it is important to have, some agility in the craft that you're going to be leading or managing. So being patient and really, really enjoying those times as an IC, because I think all of that experience that you're building and all of those failures that you've done will help you be more successful in a leadership position. So it took me like 10 years to doing a lot of like projects before, and now I'm like, oh, I actually know how to help someone navigate that because I personally went through it before. So yeah.
Great, awesome. And so the next question is, how do you build confidence to step up? I think like that is speaking more about like to become a manager, right? Like building the confidence to be able to manage. And so I think like we kind of like did a rough survey before this on Slack, and then also on the meetup page. And I think that we have like people in the audience come from different backgrounds. So some of us are transitioning or looking to transition. So what do you like? What advice would you give? Like, how do you build confidence to be able to step up to a leadership position?
I really love this question because it resonates deeply with me. So I think, it took me a long time to gain confidence as a presenter. I was even nervous before coming here, the nerves never really go away. But I think it's really about putting yourself out there and trying it. And you're probably, it might feel awkward at first, but I think it's just like practice over time. Put yourself in uncomfortable situations and face fear, kind of like, because you'll be surprised when if you do push back on something, or you have a difficult discussion at work to like drive towards alignment. saying no can actually be quite freeing. And I think the more you just like dip your toes in that water and get more comfortable with it, it'll become more natural over time. And then, you know, you'll kind of build an earning trust with people is super important. So that active listening portion is also like being quiet, and those quiet moments are actually a really great way to earn trust with people, because you're listening and you're not, you know, assuming things. But I mean, my first 6 months at Amazon, I don't even think that I like said anything in a meeting because I was just soaking it in. So
Nice. Yeah. And one note to everybody who's listening, like if in case if you're thinking about looking for ways to build up your confidence, like reach out to us if you want to speak in our events. I think that's a really great way, risk-free way to build your presentation skills. And then also we have the mentorship programs in the past. And so that's also a really good way to build your confidence up, and then get used to talking with others and mentoring others. And David, I think you have something to say about building confidence up. So why don't you go for it?
Absolutely. One thing Gretchen said that really resonated to me is it's okay to say no, and basically get used to saying no. And you know, honestly, like before becoming a manager, saying no was very difficult for me. And because I'm more of like, yes, optimism, you know, not like, nope, sorry, it's not going to happen, you know, that sort of thing. And so learning to be able to say no and be direct in your communications is definitely really important piece. I think, sorry, hold on, my computer just went to sleep. Are you guys still there? Okay, cool, it's back. I think putting yourself out there, like Gretchen was saying, is really important. And absolutely, like I'm nervous, you know, talking to you guys here, and so I think maybe we don't look nervous, but we are, and so you have to put yourself out there and do things that don't feel comfortable, just like Gretchen was saying. A couple of the things that came to mind for me, reflecting on the wins that you've had in the past can give you the confidence to take on new things and the energy you need to take on new things. So when you're not feeling confident, think about the times where you were successful, or where you had a win. Grab a hold of that and be like, okay, I did that, I can do this. So I think that's a big one. Also, just ask for help if you're not feeling comfortable, or you feel like you're not confident. Talk to other leaders, talk to, whether in your company or outside of your company, find a mentor and you know, talk to them about it, because they've probably dealt with the same thing and will have great advice for you. And then just learn as much as you can, whether, you know, reading books about leading or managing, or, you know, having conversations with others who have gone before you. I think those things definitely help build your confidence.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And yeah, regarding finding mentor, like you might be surprised that more often than not, like people are really open to doing so. So even like outside of mentorship program, our Slack channels, promote our Slack channel a little bit for ladies at UX. Eli, if you can share that invite link, that would be great. And so join a Slack channel, reach out to people, look for people you look up to, and like and ask if they can become your mentor, or have like do one session to meet and ask questions, and you might be surprised that you might get an yes. I mean, you might get rejected too, but you know, just keep trying. And I know that there are lots of wonderful people in our community that is willing to give and help. So with that, we don't have a lot of time to get through all the questions for the day-to-day policies. So this is the time I want to open up the floor for questions. So if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. And Eva, thank you for sharing the Slack channel. So that's where you can connect to our Slack channel, where we share lots of resources and look for people and connect with people. Look for peer mentors, as well as like someone with more experience. And so now is your time to ask questions if you have any. So while you're typing, while you're thinking about your question, maybe we can get through one more on the list regarding day-to-day process. So I want you, David, can you tell us what are your biggest challenge today, especially now that we are in the pandemic, like 1 year later, we're still in the pandemic. Like, what are some of your biggest challenge, like in a normal setting as well as in the pandemic era?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think some of the big challenges in managing is just like project estimation and resourcing. Things like that are the things you don't really think about when you're focused on the IC level and just doing the work. So those are things communicating to executives and across teams and whatnot. Those are all some of the big challenges that I think. And then, the last year has been a heck of a challenge, and just many of the things that we're facing day in and day out, and our designers are facing. And so just being sensitive to that and having conversations that are difficult, but like making sure that they know you support them and helping them come up with strategies that maybe they're facing challenges at home, in the pandemic, maybe they're afraid of what we're facing with the pandemic, and just helping them be able to deal with that. I think those are some of the big challenges that I've seen.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. And speaking of challenge, looks like Erin has a question, a slight different challenge. So she's asking if you have any recommendation on design challenges. Erin, I'm assuming you're talking about maybe the Adobe series, like design challenge, like design a logo in a day or something like that, right? Gretchen, do you want to take that one regarding design challenge? Do you have any recommendation?
I actually don't. I was trying to think about that one. I know that I personally don't have any recommendations for design challenges, but I know that there are some good ones on like Dribble where you might do a sketch a day. I think practicing something small every day is good, and just like trying to iterate on something quickly and not being too bound by like constraints on things is a good way to just exercise new, fresh ideas. Even if you're trying to build your portfolio, like if you're lacking portfolio work in an area, like kick off your own personal project to fill that void if you're trying to add more range.
Nice. Yeah, I remember that I shared something on Slack. I can't find it now. I can add it to the link. So I think there's like they are different like organizations and company that do run design challenges from time to time. So maybe check out that. Okay, so the next question, when you transition from IC to manager, did you encounter tensions that transition includes managing your former peers? Gretchen, do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, I have personally experienced this at Amazon, and I think that it can be awkward at first, but I actually think that if you can actually leverage the relationships that you've made with those people to your benefit as a ground of trust when you transition, I think the one thing to keep in mind is that the way that you interact with your team socially is probably going to be a bit different as you transition into a leadership position. So I think you can still keep that sense of humor, but you just kind of have to socially it can be a little bit different. So you don't want to overshare things about the business to your team, or things that might impact team building, or because your leadership presence will matter. So most of the awkwardness was internal for me. I don't know if it was outwardly, and I didn't really so I think it's just getting through those mental barriers and putting on your leadership filter when you're talking to your previous peers that are now your reports.
Right. And David, do you have anything to add to that? I think we were talking about the making of a manager, and like I think one chapter did talk about that specifically. David, do you have anything to add to that regarding tensions that you were peers and now you're the manager of your former peers?
Thankfully, I haven't managed anyone that was a former peer, but there is some dynamics that change, and with project shifts, or, if you start overseeing larger areas, sometimes those areas can be what another designer was owning previously, or maybe now you're starting to oversee something that they still own. And there can be instances where this starts to be challenging. And I think, just making sure you check your ego and the way you behave around them. If you start acting like, oh, like, well, I'm in charge of this, and that sort of thing, that it's all about how that comes across to them. Focus more on it as a partnership, so you don't like highlight the fact that I'm in charge of this. Now, obviously, there comes moments where you have to make a call, and you're the one to step up and make that call. But I think looking at it and approaching it more as a partnership then makes it a little bit more palatable for those involved.
Got it. Yeah, thank you for that. So I see that Kensley has a questions about remote mentorship tips, or add a favorite mentorship story or memory. I just want to add one note that we are putting together some Medium blog posts. So we had some learnings from the mentorship program that we put together last year, and so we're putting some tips together. So keep an eye out on that. And I did jump a little bit, so I want to get back to Leslie's questions. How did you both know you wanted to be a manager? You have a lot of questions there, so maybe we can tackle one at a time, and let's just start with the first one. How did you know you wanted to be a manager? I think that's a really good question, because like, how do you know if you are meant to be a manager or not, or can it be trained? David, want to take a stab?
Sure. First off, hey Leslie, we work together at Microsoft,
Nice.
so it's good to see you. Yeah, I think how did you both know you wanted to be a manager? I think I've just always really enjoyed people. I'm fascinated by relationships and communication. So I think the further I got into my career, the more I realized the impact I was able to have in that area, and started to see how the impact I was having as even just a mentor or a partner to my peers was starting to outweigh the impact, my potential impact as an IC. And so I realized, like, oh, I'm actually better at this people thing than I even am at, like, pushing pixels, or creating flows, or different things. And it's always telling, when you take that step and you have a team under you and you're like, wow, my team are rock stars, they're way better than I am at that. And that's an exciting feeling, where it's like, it could be feel like challenging to yourself, or like, oh man, like they're so much better at that than I am. But I think it's how you choose to look at it, and it's just like, no, like it's actually great that they're doing that and I'm not, because they're way better at it than I am. So I think that was, for me, where I started to realize the path I wanted to take as a manager.
Got it. Gretchen, do you have anything to add to that? Like, at what point did you think that, oh, I want to become a manager? Like, how did you know that? Like, where does this feeling coming from?
Yeah, I think I mentioned before, I had a long time building confidence. I was always put in art director or creative director positions, but I never personally I never asked for it. Usually, sometimes if people have leadership abilities, I was told, like, oh, you can see them rising to the top organically. It just is, like, it happens. But I actually had a lot of anxiety around decision making and like being accountable for those decisions. So it took me a while to really warm up to it. But I think once my team started growing a little bit more and I saw the value I brought in like the coaching and mentoring and seeing things from a higher level and helping connect the dots, the output of the team like way outweighed the amplification of what I could do as a sole contributor. So it became really fulfilling. And that's when I started to kind of fall in love with it as a career path.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I know that we have more unanswered questions, but we're getting to 7 o'clock. So this is where I love to start to move over to the breakout rooms. And so for those of you who has unanswered questions, feel free to still ask it in the room. And Gretchen and David, I'll leave it up to you on how you want to manage your room. If you want to address some of the questions first, or if you want to go with your topic, the topic that you want to discuss. So with that, I want to share my screen so everybody can see the two breakout rooms. So Gretchen is going to be managing the maximizing inspiration and productivity breakout room. And then David is going to manage the balancing management and design. So doing managing while working on design work at the same time. So with that said, I'm going to be, so you will see an options to ask you to go to a breakout room. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoy talking with Gretchen and David in the breakout room. Let's give a minute for everyone to join back in the main room. Then we'll mix a few closing remarks. Rosie, breakout room too short. I know it always feels that way when you were having a good discussion. So I know.
Yeah, I wasn't, I'm gonna put my PDF in here. I wasn't able to get through everything, but if anybody would like to see it, I'll put the link in the chat so that you can reference it.
Yes. Awesome. And so yeah, welcome back everyone. I think you have all joined back here. And yeah, so I hope you had a good time. So Gretchen just shared the link, and so we can just FYI, what you're seeing is some resources that probably was spoken about in the breakout room, some books recommendation, and then the Slack channel. I'm putting the Slack channel invite here in the chat again for those of you who may not be in our Slack yet. So we have post everything, all the resources from this evening's meeting in the event discussion channel. So when you log on to Ladies at UX Slack, you will be able to find that event discussion channel. So it looks like this. So yeah, so here, I know it's a little weird. I have just part of the screen share, but Ela has shared all the books recommendation there, and then also all the job recommendation there. And then for the blank UX, I think someone shared that. And so it looks like the URL was not working. So we're just sharing the general opening there. So if you have like taken notes or there's other things that you want to share with the group, feel free to use that channel. So the event discussion channel is meant for people to talk about things before events and after events. So feel free to use that channel. And so yeah, so here are some links to those openings, and don't worry if you're not able to click on the screen to get the links. All the links are in our Slack channel. And so with that, thank you so much for everyone for attending. Gretchen and David, do you have anything else that you want to say, like one last advice before we close for the night?
No, it's just, I really appreciate everybody's time, and transition can be awkward, but I think, just embrace it and just put yourself out there and it'll become more natural over time.
Love it.
Absolutely. It was great getting to be a part of this. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the awesome conversation to those that joined. And I'll leave you with a quote by Dieter Rams. You cannot understand good design if you do not understand people. I think it's a really profound quote, and definitely applies to management a lot.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Love it. David, maybe you can share that quote on the Slack channels, so others who was not able to take notes can get to it too. So yeah, thank you so much, Gretchen. Thank you so much, David. It's been my pleasure speaking with you tonight, and it's my passion to help others to move into management positions. I think that's so that's why it means a lot for me for you to participate in this series and to share your experience. I really love it. And yeah, thank you so much for everyone for joining us tonight. I hope you have a good night. So don't be a stranger, reach out to us on Slack. And again, regarding building confidence, whenever you're ready, just let me know. I'm Katrina, so you can find me on LinkedIn, on meetup.com, or on Slack. Or just reach out to any one of the planning committees. And Ela, you can also reach out to Ela. She's part of the planning committees. And yeah, thank you everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, and bye everyone.
Thanks.
And
Thanks,
FYI,
all.
we will have the part of the recording posted on YouTube at one point.
Gretchen, is it okay that I also post your slides to the Slack channel?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Bye.
Bye everyone.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.